'Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you won't see the show on your TV, so we talk about things musically. 'Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, listening to Jams and Tea. Welcome everyone to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea.
Or iced coffee.
Or iced coffee. And today we're going to be talking about two brand new albums. One from
2-liter Mountain Dew.
Morgan, we're so glad to have you back. Contribute that good old Mountain Dew.
I'll see you kick you in the back of the head, Chip. I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew.
It's so spicy I had to drink a whole 2-liter Mountain Dew.
It's not what my favorite band is.
We're going to be talking about a brand new album from pop sensation KYLIE Minogue. We're going to talk about her new album, Disco, as well as the new album by doom metal act Pallbearer, Forgotten Days. And on today's Record Club, we're going to be talking about Morgan's recommended record, the long-awaited dawn of the discussion of podcast favorite band, Opeth. We're going to be talking about their seminal release, Blackwater Park.
Yeah, boy.
But first, we're going to talk about the things that we have been listening to this week. Jake, why don't you kick us off?
I have been listening to, well, I'll do this to segue into a teaser for what we're going to be filming tomorrow. Something very, very big. We are going to be talking about Tyler's favorite current working band, I believe, The Twilight Sad. We are going to be doing a brand new B-sides episodes of their entire discography. I have been listening to every single thing they've made every day. I'm sad. I'm sad all the time.
It's right in the name.
But specifically at Twilight.
And I won't talk too much about that because, I mean, that's kind of what the episode is for. Yeah. But I've just a lot of sad Scottish post-punk this week.
It's going to be an emotional exorcism, as our episodes often are.
God, yeah.
Too often, I think.
I don't know how I summoned the emotional wherewithal to be able to stomach all of those records in one day, because normally under certain circumstances I would just kind of be like, yeah, I think one listen of Nobody Wants to Be Here, Nobody Wants to Leave, that's good for like a month, you know, like I'm solid. And now I'm just like, every day all I know is pain.
Good.
So I've been listening to a lot of that.
It's good because I'll be able to like say, you know, this part, and you'll be like, yeah
I only know this part.
Yeah. See, for the uninitiated, what we do in our B-side segment of this podcast is we take our favorite bands and we talk about their music, and then because it's a lot cheaper than therapy, we sort of emotionally vomit all over you, the viewer, or the listener, so to speak. It's a great time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Frightened Rabbit, joy, sunny days all around.
Sometimes it's sad vomiting, like Frightened Rabbit. Sometimes it's more angry vomiting, like the second Metallica episode. And
yep.
I can't remember a happy vomit we've done. That works.
Was a great angry vomit.
Have we done a happy vomit on one of those?
The first Metallica episode, Portishead. Mars Volta.
Hang on a minute. Portishead was not a happy vomit.
Okay, fair. Yeah. Okay, well, it was happy because we were talking about music that we liked.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the same with Frightened Rabbit. Doesn't mean it applies.
Fair enough. Let's see. I listened to, for the first time in full today, just because, well, I guess I'll do 2 in 1 here, and one's technically not an album, but a single. I've listened to Tyler's just bracing for cringe impact here. Like you haven't been doing it too. Phoebe Bridgers, as promised, since Donald Trump lost the election, Phoebe Bridgers released a cover of Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls with Maggie Rogers. And I've been listening to that since it came out at 12:08 p.m. or a.m. last night. I've listened to it 30 times, and I just sort of listened to all of the Boy Genius music on a playlist today. I've been really sad. And then I listened to Lucy Dacus's what the fuck is it? Historian for the first time in full. Good album. Like it, a fair deal. Lucy's a great songwriter. She has a heavenly voice. Admittedly, probably just my least favorite of the main projects from the three Boy Genius girls. By just merit of I've just spent more time with the others and just kind of like them a little bit more. But it's good. It's good. Good album.
Very good.
And also, just before moving on, this applies to everyone but August. Listen to Maggie Rogers, or I Will Kill You.
Yes, her album. What was her last album?
Heard It in a Past Life.
Heard It in a Past Life. Good album.
Currently her only album.
Oh, well, good album. Very, very good. Yeah. Very good record. I've listened. Did I talk about last week? Did I mention Stevie Nicks at all?
I think you did.
Okay, well, I listened to a lot of that again because sadness. I also gave a listen to another podcast favorite record. I listened for the first time Block Party's Silent Alarm.
Oh, yes.
Perfect album. I loved it. It is colorful, upbeat post-punk that is just, oh God, it's so my shit. I love it so much. It was so good. I highly anticipate us talking about Block Party eventually down the line. I want to get to their later albums just because I've heard varying things from people in this podcast, but just generally, like I've heard that some albums are better than the consensus has made them out to be. So I'm eager to get to those to discuss them.
Absolutely.
Really, most of them, all but one.
Yeah. I also listened to.
I'm really excited at the prospect of Silent Alarm being the first album to become our first 100 out of 100 or 10 out of 10 average.
Yeah.
On the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I just could when I did my re-listen to it, I was just like, I mean, I can't give this anything less than a 10. Why would I do that?
Yeah. No, I think we just need Saoirse to not let us down in that regard.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I'm booked to be on the Block Party episode, but I like Block Party, so I won't be shocked if I do give it a 10.
Okay.
Well, that's yeah. I listened to also first time listen on that same day. I had lots of really good first listens. I listened to an album that Tyler recommended a while back when we were talking about jazz fusion. I listened to Karma by Pharoah Sanders, which is just, it's saxophone porn. Oh God, it's good. Oh fuck. I mean, like it is like consciousness elevating shit. Just, if you're into jazz fusion, there's no excuse. It's like 30 something minutes long, and it's the progressions, the movements. I finally know why the least good song on Porcupine Tree's In Absentia is called what it is, because it's a reference to that. Because I'm just like, now I know.
Of course, Porcupine Tree made that reference.
Well, I mean, not Porcupine Tree. It's Steven Wilson that made that reference. Because he's a fucking nerd. I love you, Steven. Last but not least, finally, I'll shout out music that I'm not over the moon about, just because this happens rarely in my off time, just because I want to listen to mostly music that I like when I get the chance to not listen to things for the podcast. And that was the latest EP from one of my favorite modern punk acts, and that's Pup, the This Place Sucks EP, which is fine. It is perfectly fine. 17 minutes of perfectly serviceable punk that sounds like it came off of Morbid stuff, except like none of it is like as good as that album. So it was probably just like stuff from that. I'm hoping that they're sort of just like compiling all the shit that they don't like care about right now and then just sort of moving on to something else, I hope. But you might like it more than me. Check it out. I mean, it's produced well. There's some good moments on it. It's like, nothing Pup have released has been less than good. So I can't even really poo-poo it too much. So.
All right, I suppose that is me now.
Yes.
So, in the light of the announcement of their 2 new singles and also the election results, I listened to, or re-listened to rather, System of a Down's Steal This album, which I think is amazing. It's, I think, ridiculously underrated. There's a ton of great songs on there. I think about the first 10 songs is a pretty flawless run of System songs. It's a lot of their best material that I think goes underappreciated just because it was released immediately after Toxicity and right before Mesmerize and Hypnotize. Just the worst possible point for a record like that to be released. Next thing I listened to was an album, a very, very obscure album called Pyramid by a band called Sleep In, and they are this kind of shoegaze ambient act where they kind of make albums and music that teeters on the two of those genres. And while that sounds cool in concept, it's unfortunate the execution of it is so kind of just mediocre. The ambient side of that album is pretty amazing, but the actual attempts at shoegaze, the recording of it sounds really bad. Like the vocals sound like it's like a weird feeling where the vocals don't really mesh at all with the instrumentals. It sounds like someone singing over an existing instrumental of a song, like someone doing a cover of a song, and it's where they just use an instrumental track of the original. It's a really weird thing to describe, but it's very, very noticeable, and it just kind of kills most of the experience.
That's a shame. It sounds like a really cool idea.
No, it's not a bad idea. They have more records, so maybe I'll check out one of those. That's later down the line and hopefully better. Also on the obscure side, this one goes out to you fans of Earl Sweatshirt and Open Mike Eagle, that kind of fans. This is a early rap rock album where the rock is done as alternative rock, like an alternative rap rock album is how I'd put it, from 1992 called Play With Toys by the band known as Basshead. They are very obscure, mostly because after their first 2 records, they kind of started to suck, but their records are very good, very unique for the time, a lot of innovation. I recommend checking it out.
What is the band called?
Basshead.
Basshead.
Bass.
Is that all one word?
Yeah, all one word. B-A-S-E and then head.
Cool.
Not
Awesome.
bass,
Cool.
I'll check that out.
Yeah.
It's pretty rad. Then, continuing on a thing I listened to last week, I listened to the kind of first full-length album from the band Mass of the Fermenting Dregs, 0, Iro Toridori no Sakai. And I don't find it as consistently good as their first 2 EPs, but it's still a really fun piece of kind of post-rocky, post-hardcore, really distinctive vocalist. It's a lot of fun. Check the band out if you have the time.
Yeah,
I guarantee you that not as consistent as the first 2 EPs will definitely be August's review of my first album when it comes out.
Aww. Absolutely not. I have heard of this band. I am very curious to check them out. That's a very, very good band name.
Yeah. I was going to say, for the life of me, I won't be able to remember what they're called.
And finally, a recommendation I think I got from Saoirse a while back of Andrew WK's I Get Wet.
Wow. Classic.
Ridiculously fun, ridiculously enjoyable. Yep. It's very short. If you're old and pitchfork, don't listen to it. But I really enjoyed it, and that's what I listened to.
Yeah, always a lot of fun, Mr. WK.
Mr. W.
Morgan, what have you been listening to?
So I've listened to quite a bit in the last week, which makes it difficult to talk about because all but two of the things that I listened to are things we're talking about here. So today and tomorrow, or
yep,
yeah. So yeah, the two that are not things we're covering in official capacity. We're both a surprise for people on this podcast by the electronic duo known as Owtecker.
Oh yeah, those guys.
Yeah, them.
Those fellas.
The one was a re-listen, the other was a first listen. The first listen was Untilted, which is just Horde. It's HUARD, the album. Horde just goes, and it goes and it goes and it goes.
Yeah.
I like to think of that one as like the closest that Whittaker have come to approximating like full on like club dance music, even though it's like ridiculously fucked up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've watched that edit you made of like that DJ drops in the first track so many times.
Yeah, I'll try and remember to edit that in right here.
Yeah.
Oh, please.
Good.
That'd be cool.
I'm just thinking about it again and laughing.
It's really good.
But yeah, I also re-listened to Chiastic Slide. Is that how you say that?
I don't know.
I've said it.
I say chiastic slide sometimes, but I think it actually is. Some people say chiastic, some people say chiastic. I don't know.
Look, this band.
If you say chiastic, I'm gonna punch you in the face. No.
This band has something against real words, so like whatever, it's their fault. But yeah, that is a fantastic record that I slightly underrated the first time I heard it.
It's a grower.
I was yeah, I mean, part of it was that I was just in an influx of 90s Owtecker material, which is like a bastion of really good stuff. So, you know, the more time I have with it, the more I process it, the more I can sort of pick it apart and digest.
I think of all their like 90s era albums, it's the one that most has like a sense of, I don't like, maybe narrative's the wrong word, but it has a sense of like flow from start to finish where like there's a progression in the music that's consistent and like whereas, you know, their other albums kind of have that to a certain extent, but something like Try Repeat LP5 doesn't have that kind of consistency the whole way through that Chiastic Slide does. So yeah,
I think it gets a lot out of being sort of, or at least feeling more slight than their other 90s material.
I wouldn't call it more slight, but I get what you mean. Like it doesn't reveal itself to you like straight away, but like it's what I mean is like it takes you on a journey. I think the sound from start to finish, like you end in this place that's kind of like a complete deconstruction of where you began, and between those 2 points you kind of go on these different like journeys in the tracks. I think August, you know, I think you might understand what I'm talking about. It has this kind of explorative. It has this kind of exploratory feel to it. Like, yeah, it's really awesome.
Yeah, that's all I've listened to that we're not talking about either here or in a further episode. So
fair enough. Okay, so that I suppose leaves me.
I'll listen to that.
Yeah. So I've actually listened to like a lot of jazz this week, more than normal. And I want to highlight two albums. I listened to Miles Davis albums. I listened to Decoy, and I listened to Miles Ahead, and I listened to one that wasn't on Music Board. It's called like I can't remember, the Super Sextet or something. Anyway, they were all really good. I'll repeat it when it comes back. The two I want to talk about were, because I need to get this right, Journey in Satya Dinanda by Alice Coltrane.
Beautiful.
Yes. Insanely good avant-garde jazz album.
Yes.
Alice Coltrane, some of you may know, is a harpist. And I had never heard harp in a jazz album before, I think, and that was a fresh thing. There's also, for most of the tracks, the use of what's called a tanpura, that sounds like sort of very interesting, and then the last track uses an instrument called an oud. So yeah, lots of bringing in instruments you wouldn't normally hear, and even a lot of avant-garde jazz that I've heard.
Yeah.
And the compositions are just insanely good anyway. And Pharoah Sanders features on some of the songs playing soprano saxophone.
Yeah.
And
his contributions
are insane.
It's probably worth shouting out as well that Alice Coltrane is primarily a pianist. And you can hear her playing piano on many of Coltrane's late era albums. Like I'm talking about post Ascension, post A Love Supreme, like the real late era stuff. After they got married, she's all over it. If you dig into those late era Coltrane records, and she's just an absolutely virtuosic pianist.
Yes, I actually listened to this album because I read a story online that someone had tweeted about where John Coltrane bought her a harp and then died before it arrived. That made me very sad. And I was like, wow, I should listen to some of her records. And whoa, this is one of the best things I've ever heard. I also want to highlight a John Coltrane record because I re-listened to Giant Steps on vinyl. And this comes with a bunch of alternate takes, including one for Like Sunny, which isn't on the record, I think, but was recorded in the same sessions. And it also comes with this booklet, which is full of really interesting analysis and accounts of the recording and context. And I read that while listening to the record, and it really informed my understanding of the record in a really interesting way. And also it's just such a satisfying record by itself. I posted this in the chat, but the playing on the record is so insane that I checked twice if my record player was on the right RPM. Oh my god! Good. And it's not just that really high octane stuff as well. The ballads are super mellow and textural and well composed.
Yeah. Just an incredible fucking a group of musicians just at their peak. Not even necessarily at their peak, but like something. And just to go back to Alice Coltrane for a sec, something that should tell you how great of a pianist she is that she basically effectively replaced McCoy Tyner after he left Coltrane's band post Ascension, and the piano playing on those records is just as good. So that tells you like she's just as good a pianist as McCoy fucking Tyner. Absolutely. And Tommy Flanagan as well, who's on Giant Steps.
Yes, and something that I found really interesting reading the booklet is John Coltrane had dental surgery halfway through recording, which caused him to have to change the way in which he plays the saxophone.
Yeah,
which is really interesting. And they they get quotes from several jazz musicians who, what they found really interesting about the cover is the fact that it shows pretty much everything about how John Coltrane is playing, and how there's a jazz musician who says that his teacher showed him how John Coltrane plays, and the setup on the front cover of this album sort of teach him how he should be playing. And I thought that was really interesting. Yes, and they also talk about the fact that he's using a unique way in which he actually grips the mouthpiece, where you put your lip over your teeth and then bite down on it. Yeah. So what else have I listened to this week? I listened to. I mean, Jake isn't here at the moment, but I listened to an album he recommended to me called "Umman" by Slift, which was just a nice piece of like King Gizzard core music. Really enjoyed it. I listened to. I'm gonna have a go at this. Wolf Girl without any vowels in it by Machine Girl, which. I didn't know what to expect from the record because the cover just promises it's weird. And I found it a very satisfying experience. What else have I listened to this week? I listened to loads of vinyl while writing last night, including In the Airplane Over the Sea and Song for Our Daughter, which are two of my favorite records, one of this year, one of ever. Two great sort of folk records. Yeah. So that's what I've been doing.
Will that be, I'm curious, don't tell me the answer to this, but I'm curious whether, Saoirse, your album of the year will be Song for a Daughter or Punisher. I presume it's going to be one of those two.
Well, the things about Song for Our Daughter is the first time I heard it, I thought it was really good, maybe even the best thing Laura had done, but I wasn't like in love with it. And just the more I play it, the more I love it, and it grows so much in my estimations every time I listen to it. So
those are the best albums, I think. I've had those experiences. Those albums are the ones that I kind of really treasure in a particular way. The ones that I have like had to work for.
Sure. I mean, I say this all the time, but part of the reason my favorite band is the Mountain Goats is because every album they've made has grown on me exponentially since the first time I heard it. And what I say about All Hail West Texas is every time I listen to it, and I've listened to it upwards of like 50 times maybe. There's always one song I fall in love with a little bit more. And it's just, I love stuff. Yeah, it's just great. Yeah. Good music.
Okay. All right. So I guess it's my turn then. So I've decided I wrote in advance this week what the albums I wanted to talk about were, so I don't have to muck around. First one I want to shout out is finally, at the insistence of our friend Spencer, I listened to Oingo Boingo's debut album, Only a Lad, which is excellent. Really funny album. It's very kind of edgy and sarcastic and satirical.
Little girls, right?
Yes, it is the one with little girls on it, which slaps and is fucking great. And there's also a song.
Images taken before a disaster.
There's also a song. There's also a song on the on Only a Lad called "Capitalism," which is just really funny. Basically,
Comrade Danny Elfman.
Well, it's funny because, like, basically on its face, it's a song about like how awesome capitalism is, and like it's also vaguely libertarian. But like the whole thing about this album is that people kind of don't fully understand is that the whole thing is just like a complete piss take, and it's not really like in favor of anything. Like it's not, the album's not like
Starship Troopers type beat.
Yeah.
Well, no, because it's different because it's not really like sending up stuff to make a point, or like there's no like political agenda there. It's just pure mischief. Like he's just being a rascal, basically. There's not like a political agenda. It's just like,
you little whipper.
It's just like songs that are designed to piss people off and are fucking fun. Like it's a fucking fun album. The grooves are intense and awesome. It's not the masterpiece that is Dead Man's Party, but it's very good. And I look forward to, I'm going to listen to their whole discography so I can get a sense of the trajectory. But really fun album. I think that everyone here would really dig it, honestly. I also listened to Continuing and Accelerating the Chaos. I listened to Mr. Bungle's self-titled album.
Oh boy, here we go.
Which was quite an experience.
I was there for it. I remember witnessing it.
Once again, poop.
For our listeners at home, I vividly detailed in my group DMs the experience of listening to this record, which was really singular. I I don't know how I feel about it still. I think I'll have to listen to it a bunch more times, but I don't know if I want to listen to it again.
I was gonna say, are you like capable of that mentally?
I don't know. It's so fucking weird.
Okay, now this is Stockholm Syndrome.
It's
Mike Patton's bitch.
Like, it's not even just this. It's not even the case of a record where it's like, this is really weird, but I appreciate what Mike's doing, and I appreciate how uncompromising it is, and it's actually like, I think it's a valuable experience. I don't know if it's good or not. I really don't.
This is the beginning of the journey of like 5 weeks from now. He's going to be like, I'm Tyler, and this is my 5-page essay and screed about why this is actually a masterpiece. Cracks numbers.
but also, like, there are 2 full minutes of Mike Patton taking a shit.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up.
I am in no way exaggerating.
No, that it happens. And then and then in like 2 songs later, there's like a full 5 minutes of them just like moving like a couch or something.
This is on the docket to review, right?
There's this one moment in one of the songs where like one of the craziest songs where like there's all this musical chaos going on, and then like coming through it like a fucking ray of light is this like distorted sample of Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet saying, "The one thing I can't fucking stand is warm beer." And I just, the moment that I heard that, I was convulsing with laughter.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and so it's just this bizarre trip of 70 fucking minutes of just, there's a song called The Girls of Porn that made me,
I love Alex Cameron.
It made me want to puree my insides.
See, you went Alex Cameron, I went Don Henley.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, we are going to discuss Mr. Bungle's self-titled album on the podcast at a certain point, so I won't.
California at a later date.
And California, which I'm looking forward to hearing also, I won't say anymore, but Jesus.
I am keeping my like self completely. I don't know anything about Mike Patton, anything about Mr. Bungle. Like, I don't know shit about any of this. Purely because we're going to cover it on the podcast, and I want to be one of the people who is just like goes into this with no context.
Yeah, and like here's the thing: is once you listen to either the self-titled or California, you will still know nothing about Mr. Bungle or Mike Patton.
Yay! My favorite kind of experience.
We talk about some very strange albums on this fucking podcast.
It's like it's like blending a blender.
Yeah.
No, it's accurate.
Anyway,
reads Metal Machine
processed by the Bungles.
So, from chaos comes clarity, because the next record I want to talk about is one of the best albums I've heard all year, and it's not a surprise because it's a classic record that I just hadn't heard until this point for no good reason, and I've been working my way up to it because I've been going through the discography of this musician Herbie Hancock for the last few months, and so I finally got to his most beloved record, Headhunters, the other day, and it's like when you hear In a Silent Way for the first time. You're just like, this is perfect. This is virtuosic jazz playing. Everyone on the record is playing some. No, it's not. I'm not saying it's necessarily at the level of like a Love Supreme, but like it's a similar effect when you put it on, in the sense that it's like, this is feels like a thing that music has been building towards, or like this kind of music has been building towards. So it's really, it's just a perfect album. I don't know what else to say. Listen to it. It's 40 minutes long, and it'll make you feel things.
This feeling that Tyler has described as something will crack open further on the Blackwater Park segment of today.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Much the same feeling.
Yeah.
What Morgan saying that he's gonna like an album that he said he likes before?
Yeah. But like
what are you fucking talking about?
I don't fucking know, man.
Headhunters is one of those particularly cool classic albums in the sense that you can tell it's a classic from the opening seconds. Like 2 seconds in, you're like, oh, okay, this is a classic. 2 seconds in, I'm not kidding. You'll 2 seconds in, you'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, it's a classic. And those records are the best kinds of classic records. Yeah. So I've talked about 3 first listens. I'm just going to quickly shout out 2 re-listens because I've kind of spent ages on this segment. So I'll move along. I re-listened to one of my favorite albums ever, Quebec by Ween.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just a perfect album. It's their masterpiece. We're going to be talking about The Mollusk eventually, quite soon on this podcast, I think.
Soon, I think.
So that's going to be awesome. The Mollusk is a great sort of concept record, but Quebec is just like perfect song after perfect song. And also the Fucked Jam, which is a thing that exists.
It's so good.
Certainly.
The Fuck Jam, that was the song from that album that I talked about before. Every time I listen to it, I can only imagine someone rapping over it every time.
Yeah, it's this weird kind of instrumental that like halts the flow of the record completely and sounds really bizarre and silly, but also works. But also, this is an album that has some of the most perfect psychedelic rock songs ever made. Like, if you want to say that like the Flaming Lips are the greatest kind of psychedelic band of the modern era, then I would agree. But they have never written a song as good as Transdermal Celebration on this album. Anyway, that's a great album. Another one I want to shout out as a re-listen that I just did this morning, actually, to the Chemical Brothers' Dig Your Own Hole, which is an album of my childhood. One I know August is also a fan of. August, incidentally, just dropped his Topster 100 favorite albums Topster yesterday.
Yes, he did.
So if you visit August's Twitter, you can view it. It's a very, very good list, and this album is on it. And it's an album, as I just said, that has been in my life since I was a little kid. One of my favorite bands as a kid, the Chemical Brothers. Bands, duos, whatever. And Dig Your Own Hole is just like, one thing I'm struck by every time I listen to it is how fucking loud it is. Like, it's one of the loudest albums I've ever heard. Not in the sense that like it's this blaring sounds that are just, well, yeah, there are blaring sounds on it, but just that the whole thing is mastered really loudly. And it's
songs for the deaf kind of thing.
And it's kind of like representative of an era in the late 90s of a specific kind of like an offshoot of house and techno music called Big Beat, which this album is basically the apotheosis of. And yeah, I've added that to our record club for later in next year as well. So we'll discuss that eventually. But yeah, very, very, very good album. And yeah, it's my week.
All right, very nice.
So
and with that,
we move on to our new release reviews. And
KYLIE Minogue.
First up is credited to just Kylie, which I think is something that she's been doing. Her releasing albums under just Kylie for a while now, because she's such a singular personality in pop music. Her music was inescapable at the turn of the century. You have classic albums like Impossible Princess, which was obviously a flop at the time it came out, but has since been reevaluated as a great record. And Fever, most pertinently, her biggest selling album that had her biggest hit on it, which was Can't Get You Out of My Head. And so Kylie has kind of always been around. Since then, she's had other hits that I haven't prepped properly for this, so I can't think of what they are, but she has been a singular musical pop artist. She's kind of ascended to the status of legend relatively easily, as well as having cameos of note on Nick Cave's Murder Ballads, and also as an actress in films like Leos Carax's Holy Motors. And now, after a strangely quiet decade for Kylie, like she has released albums in the past 10 years, but nothing's really made waves until this new record, interestingly enough, which is actually part of a new disco revival, new NU disco revival this year, alongside a few other records, including Jessie Ware's What's Your Pleasure, which we've reviewed, Dua Lipa's Future Nostalgia, and Rasheen Murphy's Rasheen Machine, which we haven't discussed on this podcast, but is also a very good a slice of that kind of new disco sound. Although it is probably worth noting that two of those records kind of hewed closer to house and R&B in a lot of respects. Whereas this new Kylie record is full-on, pure disco revival, with the only giveaways to its current era status being some of the punchier and shinier aspects of its production. There are definitely plenty of moments on this album where you could quite easily mistake it for a legitimate product of that original disco era that it's aping. Yeah, does anyone have a burning desire to review this first?
I'll go first just to get it out of the fucking way.
Okay.
Well, point blank, I was not excited for this because my, Jessie Ware tight beat. So I saw this and I was just like, I don't know who Kylie Minogue is. And then I was just like, oh, can't get you out of my head. I work retail. That song annoys the shit out of me. And then I saw the cover, which, irrespective of the album, Jesus Christ, it's she is a pop legend, but not so much that she can't secure some good album art, because I mean, what in God's name is happening?
Graphic design is my passion.
I've thought about this heavily this week, and I actually think that
oh, Jesus Christ.
I don't no, I don't like using this phrase, but I do think that album art is an example of something that is so bad it's good.
Okay, fair enough.
I thought you were about to be like, and here's why.
I don't think it's great.
Here's my 3-page essay on why Kylie Minogue's Disco is a good album cover.
It's a terrible album cover, but it's terrible in really funny ways. That means I can't stop looking at it.
It definitely has that quality about it. Like
it's like this example is similar. Or not similar, but simpler. But it makes me think of the same way that Shut Up and Dance Before the Police Come. Makes me think of that. Which is,
if you've never seen that, please Google it immediately.
Doing that right now.
I would ask Tyler to throw it up in the edit.
That is a cover.
It's amazing.
Okay.
Godhood.
Wow. Oh my!
Okay, I will put
glorious.
It's same vein. So, needless to say, I did not. I was not looking forward to this at all. So, color me surprised when I actually walked away with this very positively. I think this is a very fun album. I think this is a very its principal goal to get to the listener to dance is one that it achieves with me. I love the full sounding production. As Tyler said, you can kind of mistake a lot of this stuff to come right out of disco era. It's just that the only difference, I'd say, not that I'm super experienced with that stuff, but I've listened to some of Kylie's earlier stuff since I listened to this, just to get a grasp on her. And but I would say that this is just a bit more, it's a bit more expensive sounding. It's very lavish. Just immediately kind of hits you. The first song, Magic, best song on the record, if you ask me, which is, slightly damning just because it's like, oh, it starts out this and then never gets that good again. But I just think Magic is a really, really stellar pop song. It's got this insatiable groove. It's got a wonderful beat. And pretty much every song on here is just sort of follows in that vein. It sounds like a backhanded compliment, and I hate to say it just because it's kind of the same thing I said about the Jessie Ware album. The difference here, though, is that it's like, I do think that the album itself is just a bit one note. Like, I don't think that there is a titanic amount of variety here. Not that there, like, needs to be, or like that this genre demands it. Because I still think it is successful despite the repetition, but the difference here, for me at least, all lies in the song structure. All of these songs have really, really satisfying builds and crescendos, and they know how to level out their energy better. Whereas on the Jessie Ware album, which I'm going to keep coming back to because it's a meme, ha ha ha, funny. But that my problem with that was the way that every song just sort of plateaus. It just sort of has that rise, hit, go, and then it's just kind of
Tyler's face.
Oh, for fuck's sake!
You knew this would happen.
What do you want from me? I am just
saying. Saoirse said something. I'm not talking.
Both of you, pipe down.
I will save my piece for when it's my turn. I'm not saying a word.
My affinity for this record is that it knows how to come back down, is that it knows how to, it is much better at sort of filling in the gaps of its structure, and I admire that, and I understand that might not necessarily do it for everybody, but with my pop music, I like that, like, again, it's sort of like with Carly Rae Jepsen's Emotion. That's a record that doesn't really have a tremendous amount of variety to it. It makes up for that in really good hooks. It makes up for that in really full-sounding production. It makes up for it lyrically. It makes up for it in all these different ways. And I'm not putting this on the par with that because it's not as good. I do think that, like also the Jessie Ware album, that lyrically, it's just sort of what it is. Like, it'll get you to dance and it'll do that. It's really nothing like, I'll say that maybe that like there's sort of something a bit more experiential, I guess, about Jessie Ware's album that sort of gets to the heart of why that music's really kind of appealing to people, whereas this is just more surface level, which again, I think is fine. It's just that it hits a different wavelength, I suppose. And the real, I guess, thing to say about it is that for its 12-song duration, it is not particularly long. It does not outstay its welcome. I think that there is no significant dip in quality. I think it all sounds very good. It's just a very enjoyable pop record, and it's very danceable. It's very fun. There's not too much that I feel I can add to the conversation or say about it, especially considering I'm the worst. But, you know, I turn it on and I have fun, and that's the primal base appeal of this music, and I think it does it well.
No, you're right.
I like it a lot.
You're right. This is definitely a record that knows how to have fun, and it's a record that doesn't overthink that notion either. And I'm certainly not seeking to take that away from anyone. It's a very fun album. I mean, at points for me anyway. Look, I think the best way I can describe my feelings on this record is to say the word mixed, because I don't dislike it at all. In fact, I don't think there's anything on here I would call bad. There's some stuff on here I would call mediocre, and I'll get into it. But there's also some stuff on here that I think really achieves its goals quite concisely and well. And first of all, it's produced impeccably. I don't think there is a single song on here that sounds off in any regard. And there are definitely a lot of songs which go for that kind of more maximal disco sound where there's a lot of stuff happening. And it's very much kind of the intense vibe of the dance floor. I mean, it's very tempting to go to do these comparisons between this and What's Your Pleasure, because that is just another new disco record that we have discussed. We have discussed this here, but it's awkward because I think that they're very different records in a lot of respects as well. Like,
they are.
That record is not really a new disco record to me per se. It's more like a housey R&B record that adopts new disco aesthetics frequently, where it's not like as consistently committed to the notion of disco as this is, because that's a record that I think has these kind of, it ebbs and flows. It has this real masterful structure to it that just pulls you along and through these kind of different subsections, whereas this is completely different in the sense that this is a record that's fully committed to just like hammering you with the disco grooves constantly. Like this is an album where the party does not let up for all 12 tracks, and that's by design. And so yeah, very different aims between these two records, very different goals. That said, I do think that, I mean, obviously I think that What's Your Pleasure is the more successful of the two records, but I would also argue that even Future Nostalgia and Machine Machine, two albums which I both like but don't love, are more successful in the goal of evoking disco in a way that feels vibrantly interesting and engaging than this does, and I'll try and explain why that is in a way that makes sense. But first, I'll start off by highlighting the high points on this record, actually, I think, because there are plenty of them, and I want to shout them out. I agree with Jake. The opener Magic is a strong slice of the sound. It's a very good song. It'll undeniably fill floors. It has a genuine charm that transcends the kitsch, and the kitsch is laden thick on this record. But it pulls through. Real Groove is fun and punchy. The vocal effects that KYLIE uses in parts of this track add a lot, I think. Monday Blues is even better, I think. It has this fantastic acoustic guitar sample that anchors this really infectious groove, and that's one of the best grooves I think KYLIE's ever written on anything I've heard of hers. Last Chance is the most effective example on the record of KYLIE using her voice almost like an instrument, driving the melody and infusing the track with the same energy as like a classic Bee Gees song. And it has a dance beat that's no doubt influenced by the 90s Euro disco wave. So in many ways, this is kind of like, rather than being like new disco in the sense that something like fucking Future Nostalgia is, it's more like a fusion of classic disco and Euro disco. And that's cool. I really like that song. I think the best track on the album is Supernova, which has these multiple fantastic vocal hooks just stacked into the song, and they all really linger, unlike some of the other hooks on the record, which are not quite as successful as the ones on this track. It also has a fantastic instrumental. It's constructed of these surging string samples and an absolutely disgusting bass groove that I really love. It's really thick. It's the fullest realization of the scene, the mood, the aesthetic, and the persona that I think KYLIE is seeking to evoke with the record. And I really love the song. What I will say, though, for as well as this is produced, and it is very well produced, the tracks do at points feel slight and not quite fully formed, especially if you're making comparisons with other works of new disco that have come out this year. There are also, I think, points where KYLIE lacks the charisma to really pull the songs together. And it's not that she can't sing or that her singing isn't, deliriously pleasured and emotive and whatever words you want to use to describe it. She can definitely sing. But there are definitely a lot of spots on this record where I think she sounds kind of anonymous. Like you don't really necessarily feel like you're listening to KYLIE Minogue. Which perhaps is by design, like perhaps she's trying to expand her perceptions of like what kind of pop singer she is and expand into different genres and stuff. But there are definitely moments on this record where I think she feels a little bit lost in the music and anonymous. There are moments like on Miss a Thing where she affects a timbre that sounds a little bit like Carly Rae Jepsen, which I think is kind of cool. But there are other moments like Where Does the DJ Go or Dance Floor Darling, where her attempts to kind of add a sense of personality to the music kind of feel really just corny and weird. Another limitation here, and again, this is really just more a comparative. See, I hate criticizing purely on the basis of comparisons. I hate doing that. So I'm not like trying to make comparisons with specific records, but just with like the sound that this is coming from. But compared to songs on those other 3 records that I've said, the songs here sometimes feel a little uninspired. And obviously the purpose of this music is not to be lyrically insightful or anything. It's to make you dance. But you do have a song like Miss a Thing, which is constructed entirely of cliches and perfunctory writing. And what the result of that is a piece that will work on the dance floor, no doubt, but it kind of just rolls off you. You won't remember it the next day. And I think that for a piece of hook-laden pop, that kind of memorability is essential. And definitely some songs on the album have it, but there are an equal number that I think don't have it. I mean, I genuinely, I dare any one of you to tell me a single thing about I Love It without looking at your notes. Because that song is nothing. It's just, there's nothing there. And I hate to say it, but yeah. And that's not to say that songs like Supernova that I do like are lyrical miracles or anything. They're certainly not. But one thing that's notable is that I do come away from a song like that not really caring about the writing, because I'm so swept up in the musical rush of it. But that's more than I can say for songs like Unstoppable or Celebrate You, where I think the grooves are much flatter and less interesting, and so I have little choice but to focus on what KYLIE is saying. And it's frankly distracting and sour to be listening to a song with as anthemic a groove as Say Something, just to have KYLIE beg in my ear, can we all be as one again? No, KYLIE, please no. Where does the DJ go is truly the question of the generation, I think. Something that future historians will puzzle over. Although they will not puzzle over it as extensively as I have puzzled over why KYLIE thought this track was fit to release. Not a fan, sorry. Dance Floor Darling has this heavily Daft Punk inspired vocal, but honestly just comes off feeling quite derivative in a way that, and again, I've said in the past, I don't think that music that is derivative is inherently bad. But it's a song that kind of, I think, fails to rise above that comparison in any meaningful way. So yeah, I definitely don't want to give off the impression that I hate this record, because I don't. The songs that I have shouted out, Magic, Real Groove, Monday Blues, Supernova, Last Chance, are great songs. I will come back to them. But the record does feel as though more often than not, it lacks an identity. It lacks an inspiration that the other 3 records of new disco this year, and just generally this kind of like dance pop music has. And KYLIE's own previous music, like a record like Fever, for instance, which I revisited this week and still slaps. Yeah, at least it has a unified concept, and that's great. But it does leave me a little bit cold, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, my thoughts are in a really very similar vein, so I'll bounce off of that. I think this is a perfectly adequate record. I think that would be the word I would use to describe it. It has its bangers, it has its moments. None of it will stay with me in the long term. It's already slipping from my memory. I enjoyed my time with it, certainly with songs like Supernova and the opener, Magic, and see, we're already encountering problems. Say Something, that's the name of it. I like that one quite a bit. But I think too much of it feels too scattershot, and even more so too kind of underdeveloped in places. It all sounds very good, but I feel like not very many of the ideas are holistic within the context of the record itself. Yeah, it feels, I don't know, I feel like it's in this weird place where it feels like both too slight and too long to me, because it's like and it's not really anything to do with the ideas being developed or not in that case. Well, no, it's everything to do with that. It's nothing to do with the pacing of the album so much as I just like it should be the exact length that it is, but the ideas need to be more cohesive and developed and just generally more inspired. Yeah, I don't want to harp on that for too long, because I think even if this is like, you know, like perfectly adequate, you know, that implies a positive, so I don't want to harp on the negative. And I once again do think this is good, ish.
Something I forgot, but it just came back to me, is that I think the comparison I made, because I keep thinking about like Jessie Ware and stuff, because I love that. That's my currently, I don't know if it will stay that way at the end of the year when I decide officially, but that's currently my album of the year. So it's hard for me to not avoid those kinds of comparisons. But like, to me, what I think I said in a DM the other day was like, What's Your Pleasure is like OK Computer, and this is like Muse's Showbiz.
You did say that, yes.
It's not a bad album. It's not a bad album. But
that's a burn though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't hold this up to What's Your Pleasure. It just crumbles immediately. But yeah, it's a fun time. I enjoyed my time with it mostly. I have no interest or intention of revisiting it.
I think also like perhaps KYLIE might just be a bit unlucky in the sense that this record has come after those other 3 new disco revival records, when I presume like when it was recorded, like those records probably weren't even out. So it's just coincidence, and it's just bad luck that it's come at a point of saturation this year. Because like this is an interesting new direction for like pop music, and I expect that, especially when you've got an artist as big as Dua Lipa making a new disco record, that was quite successful. A number of like big singles on that record, so it seems inevitable that this sound is going to be like, it's going to continue, and we're going to see more of it, and we're going to see it from big artists. But that raises an interesting point of like how that sound is, whether that sound is going to last, like what is going to be done with it from here, because this record I think skirts up against kind of the limitations of it, and it raises some interesting questions in terms of like how can artists utilize it but also infuse their own personalities into it. And that's something that I think is the core of where this record doesn't work for me. It's just the fact that, like I said, it doesn't feel like a KYLIE record. You don't feel like you're listening to KYLIE. You just feel like you're listening to very, very well produced disco music that someone is singing.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that identity is a bit of a problem here. I mean, it just, I definitely see what you mean with the timing being bad, but I can't help but feel like I would feel the exact same way about this record removed from that context. It probably did hurt it in some ways subconsciously, because I quite enjoyed What's Your Pleasure and Future Nostalgia. But it's just, I don't know. It feels...
Yeah. Well, it's good that it's getting this attention anyway, because like for the fact that it's coming after those records, I'm frankly surprised that it's getting as much kind of buzz as it is. But I'm glad that it is, because, you know, KYLIE's a legacy artist and deserves to still be getting, like, the fact that we're talking about this is, I think, even though I'm not like in love with it, I think is really cool, because it's always satisfying when you have a legacy artist that hasn't kind of really made waves in a while starts making waves again.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I figured out who Kylie Minogue was last week, but sure.
It's also
See, this surprised me so much because Kylie Minogue is such a ubiquitous pop culture figure to me, anyway.
Yeah, it's because we're American.
I didn't know who she was until a month ago.
Yeah, you know what? I think
knew
it was
who she was because of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
Yeah,
right.
You know what, Saoirse? I think it's just that because she's Australian for starters, so that explains how I know who she is. But my understanding has been that her music, that kind of turn of the century stuff, was always bigger in the UK anyway than the US.
That's true. It was really big here, like that Cool Britannia type thing,
Yeah, she was never really like big in the US, I don't think.
No, sure, yeah. I mean, especially
it would explain a lot.
Like, there's a big legacy of club music in Britain, so it makes sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's my thoughts on that. I surrender the floor.
So, do you want to go, or do you want me to go, August? Up to you.
I mean, you want to close it on a positive note?
Yeah, I think that's best.
Okay. Well, then I'll go.
Okay.
So this album opens up with Magic, ironically, which is the longest song because Magic is the quickest thing this album runs out of.
Hey!
I don't know why I turned into Andrew Dice Clay there, but
lyrically, the song is pretty peppered with cliches. I find the beat really satisfying to listen to here. This having one of the best grooves across the album. Sometimes I think, the chorus here is just a machine gun of cliche. I mean, look, I don't expect a dance record to give me deep commentary on the military-industrial complex, but I at least expect there to be something distinct enough about the writing that it feels identifiable. And I think Tyler made a really good point of that, of how this record feels almost personality-less because of the writing, a lot of the singing. It just feels like part of a wave. On the song, there's some kind of, I guess, unnatural sounding effects on her voice, which I thought added to the song. I mean, they were weird, but they worked out enough in this case that I was like, okay, it works for the tone we're going for here of this kind of cheesy 70s-ish slice of music. I mean, fortunately, that wasn't throughout the whole album. Otherwise, I might have had more of an issue with it. But I think I feel very similarly about the next song, Miss a Thing, as I do to that song. It's just a decent song. I thought Real Groove, though, was a pretty nice piece. I really loved the kind of vocoded bridge on this song. I thought that sounded really cool. Loved that idea. And I mean, as has been made a point of plenty, the production here is just so nice. It all sounds very clean, and Kylie's voice from time to time can work exceptionally well with this. I mean, but generally, I do think the first 3 songs are the high point of this album, because after here, that issue of like a lack of a defined personality just becomes more and more prevalent as the album goes on. It feels more and more soupy, more and more non-distinct, save for the chorus on Where Does the DJ Go, which is just the weirdest, most stupidly catchy thing on this album.
Yep.
I could give a shit what the verses are here. Those all suck, but the chorus is just so stupidly catchy. I almost admired it. But
almost.
Yeah. Doing a lot of lifting there.
I just after coat of like sugary upbeat, fun production on this album, I just find myself getting a little bored. And I mean, it's not even that I think this album is horrible. It just doesn't do a whole lot for me, because here Kylie Minogue is fucking Medusa and has turned me to stone and refused that I dance to any of this. The most I get is like a nervous twitch from sitting just deadly still.
And somebody knows what it was like for me to listen to the Jessie Ware album now.
Oh!
Yeah. Oh yeah, don't think I wasn't considering just changing the names.
Well, you know
just
what?
Writing down your whole review and changing the name.
I know, right?
Well, that's it. That's the thing. This is proved nice and fortuitous because it's a nice reversal of that situation. So you now get to understand how I felt on that day.
Sure.
Not really. I don't care enough about this album. Like, I don't care about this album 1/10 as much as you care about What's Your Pleasure.
Yeah.
But also, I had more people on my side with that album than you have with this one. So I guess it kind of balances in that way.
If I'm not wrong, it's sort of like the halves are switched, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know. I don't know how you. Well, I don't know what you think about this album yet.
I've been pretty public about the fact I enjoy this album quite a bit.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
Yeah, so roles have been reversed. But yeah, on that note of not caring enough, the songs on here I like aren't really good enough to save the project for me. I don't even really think they're good enough for me to like want to listen to them on their own. I mean, really, it's just damning that for a disco album, I don't really want to get up and move around while listening to it. It's just, and that's the fucking album. I wasn't a fan, but it's not the worst thing we've ever reviewed. It's just
That's true.
Not my thing.
Now, if only we could find out where our DJ has gone. Morgan.
Where has the DJ?
Shoot the DJ, how about, once we find him?
Haha.
I did it, Saoirse. I did the Green Day.
Yeah, you did. It's, okay, so I actually think it's really interesting. Yeah. I think it's really interesting that we have been comparing it to the Jessie Ware album, because the things that, for all their comparison points, the things that actually draw me to each album are very different to me, anyway.
Yeah, I would agree.
The thing that draws me to the Jessie Ware album is the fact that, like, yeah, it's a pop disco record, but it's still quite sophisticated, it's classy, and you just compare the two album covers, and like you look at Jessie Ware, sort of with very artsy lighting, with very classy makeup on, putting her chin out just a little on the cover, and that kind of embodies the tone of the record, where it is a very smooth pop record with an edge of provocation in the lyrical themes. And
I would say more than an edge, that is one of the horniest albums of this year.
Sure. No, yeah. I'm not going to disagree with that, for sure. Whereas this, you look at that cover and it's like stupid and it's glitzy and completely
looks like a fourth grader made it.
And in a way, the appeal this album has for me is that it's stupid and it's glitzy and it's frivolous.
Yeah.
You know what? I want to talk about my journey very briefly. I'll keep it brief with this album cover. Because the first time I saw it, I thought that it was a beam of light that Kylie's disembodied head was emerging from.
Which would have been amazing.
Immediately I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's a cover. So then I thought, that's actually that's stupid, but it's also like, I respect that. And then I was listening to the album and I was looking at the cover some more, and then I realized, oh no, actually no, her torso is there. She's just wearing a black dress.
Yeah.
And she has her arms out like this. And I'm like, okay, so she's doing like this T-pose thing with her like head emerging from this beam of light. And then I kept staring at it and listening to, because I listened to this album 3 times. And I think it was on the third time that I realized that she's not actually T-posing. She's doing this weird thing with her arms.
Yeah.
Where that's not even that. It's like she's got one hand like this and the other hand like this. And the light's actually emerging from her hands.
She's doing the run the jewel symbol is what she's doing.
No, she's like the X-Men character that's got like the laser that emits from his chest.
Saoirse, it's like someone with Alzheimer's misremembering the RT jokes.
Yeah.
Anyway, just real journey I had with that cover.
Absolutely. But in a way, that appeal carried me through the album in many ways, because I wasn't that excited for it. And after like the first like 4 or 5 tracks, I was just like, this has just sold me on how utterly frivolous it is, because that's sort of what I like about the dance music that affects me the most, is that I just switched my intellectual side of my critical faculties, and just I let my dumbest instincts take over. And so when you get something like the opening of Supernova with that goofy as fuck vocal mixing, I go with that because this album makes me feel silly. Or with even a chorus of Where Does the DJ Go? Again, real like dumb as a bag of hammers. But I find the groove infectious. I find the way that the rhythm interacts with the lyrics infectious, and just the real like just 80s throwbackness of it. I find compelling. Like this, something like Monday Blues captures the fact that this is an album for like a Janet who works in the office, who drinks red wine on the weekends, and I am happy for Janet, and I think this album appeals to the Janet in all of us.
Yeah,
that is my favorite thing that has ever been said on this podcast. Is I am happy for Janet.
Old Duffy.
Yeah.
We're gonna alienate one of our 5 viewers.
What do you mean alienate?
Insulting him.
That is not an insult. It's just a fact.
No.
Yeah.
Fine.
No.
But yeah, no, and like real groove.
That's just who he is.
Sorry, yeah, cool. Yeah. With something like real groove, again, I find the verses largely unmemorable, and when I listen to them I tend to zone out, but when the chorus comes in and the synths drop out and you just get the bass line, it is just like serotonin has hit me. Or I mean, even like Tyler kind of ragged on the song I Love It, but again
I didn't rag on it. I just said that it's fucking anonymous. Like there's I don't remember it. I've listened to it 3 times and I forget it as soon as I'm on the following track.
No, that's fair enough. But that is a song that I find with the chorus with the flow of I love it. It's just there's a way that the lyrics always sort of beat you to the next line, just slightly ahead of you, that it just really affects the rhythm parts of my brain. Ultimately, with this album, it has more killer hooks than John Carpenter's The Fog. And I vibed with it, and it might just be that I am so much deeper in lockdown now. So this completely, switch your brain off, have fun album is maybe what I needed to hear at the moment. Whereas when we've reviewed other dance pop albums, I haven't been quite as despondent about the state of the world. But yeah, I did do a vibe on this album.
Yes.
So I guess the hook really was the last thing you remembered, Tyler.
Oh!
Ooh.
The hook gonna be what it is.
I really like the closer as well, Celebrate You. It's like the one ballad on the album. It's a good note to go out for, and I enjoyed it a lot.
One thing I want to say before we move on to our favorite tracks and ratings is that I want to shout. I've already shouted it out, but I kind of feel like I've glossed over it because we don't know it as well as the other ones. But I want to shout out that Roisin Murphy album, Roisin Machine, That is the second best new disco album of this year. And if I had heard it when it came out, I would have definitely pushed for us to review it. I'm late to the party on that one, but it's sensational. So if you enjoy this album, I guarantee you'll enjoy that album. If you don't enjoy this album, I'm pretty sure you'll still enjoy that album. Very good. Very good.
So just, if you like music, you'll enjoy that album.
Yeah,
what do you do if you don't like Jessie Ware's What's Your Pleasure?
You fucking kill yourself is what you do, you fucking loser.
I concur.
Yeah. So, on that note, let's move on to our favorite tracks and ratings for.
On the note of suicide, Jake, what are your favorite tracks and ratings?
My favorite tracks.
Jesus Christ.
Nope, not gonna make that joke. Anyway, my 3 favorite tracks are Magic, Supernova, and Say Something. My least favorite track, I will probably say, I'll just go ahead and say that the least memorable track on here for me is probably Unstoppable. I just don't really remember much about it, and it's sandwiched between much better songs, I think. I like Where's DJ Go? Fuck you. And I give the album 7.5.
Neat. Oh.
Ooh. All right. So, I guess that means my 3 favorite tracks on this album are, and I believe I already said it was just the first 3, Real Groove, Miss a Thing, and Magic. My least favorite would probably be Where Does the DJ Go? And I would give this album a 4.5 out of 10.
Nice.
Jakes, what's your pleasure rating?
I knew someone was going to say it. I'm just like, I'm going to keep my mouth shut.
Look, it's burned into my brain. Morgan.
My 3 favorite tracks are, hang on. Excuse me.
I want to say Jake's rating
Supernova
for Jessie Ware.
Was it? Oh,
it was.
I remember it being 4.5 for some reason. So that's just like the ultimate like spitting on me while I'm down.
My 3 favorites are Supernova, Say Something, and Magic.
Say something. I'm giving up on you.
Nope.
I was resisting making that joke so hard, and you've gone there.
One
time Tyler has gone for the dumb joke over me.
My least favorite is Monday Blues. Because I need to go on a small rant here. Stop writing about days of the week. Stop it. You were not. The Cure did it once, and that was the only time it's ever been good. Because that's not what the song is about.
Yeah.
I was gonna say
I do not.
That's one of my favorite tracks, but it's because I think the groove is so great on the song, and I just I kind of wish it was about something else. But yeah, I agree.
Something? Anything? You're a pop star. Mondays do not matter to you. Get a grip.
Get real.
5.5 out of 10.
Fucking David Lynch down there. Get real.
Get real.
Fucking morons.
On your fucking telephone.
You're listening to disco on your fucking telephone.
Yes.
Imagine someone with like a rotary dial phone picking it up and listening to Kylie Minogue.
It's just literally like someone gets a phone call on their dial phone, they pick it up, and you just hear like a vague voice like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, it's the weekend. It's like anyway. I enjoyed Magic, and I enjoyed Sonnet. Celebrate You, and I'm also going to go with Where Does the DJ Go? Because I'm in a done mood. And my least favorite was Unstoppable. And I'm giving the album an 8 out of 10.
My 3 favorite tracks are Supernova is my favorite, and then I'll say Magic and Last Chance I'll shout out. And my least favorite, I didn't really talk about it, but I think that Celebrate You was corny as hell. and I think I genuinely don't care for it. So I'm gonna give the album a 6 out of 10.
Okay. So that is a 6.3. What can I give you for context? Met's got a 6.5. Von Hauswolf got a 6.4, and Sufjan Stevens got a 6.2.
Sick. So let's move on.
Yeah, time for a change of pace.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm sorry, just the way that Tyler said sick. Anyway,
let's move on now to a very different record that obviously I will get Jake to introduce. Pallbearer's Forgotten Days. So I actually listened to a lot of Pallbearer this week as well, but I'll let Jake introduce this because this is his baby, and he wanted to push for this to be covered, despite the fact that I think it came out a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it did.
So Jake, tell us about Pallbearer.
The Pallbearer are a doom metal band from Arkansas. They've been active since kind of the late 2000s. And they are kind of sort of bringing back an older style of doom metal that, like, I think that once, like, Black Sabbath sort of pushed away from their stuff like Paranoid and went into stuff that's more along the lines of, like, pushing the boundary and being more, like, burgeoning on being, like, psychedelic, like Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, or Sabotage, where it's really, like, adventurous and long. There's more of an incorporation of, like, a wider instrumentation, just a really, like, heavy sound. But they did start off as more like classical doom metal with their album Sorrow and Extinction, which is a very sort of leans into the side of doom metal that's funeral doom, which is a bit slower, a bit more mournful, and a bit more like just focused on tone above all else. They've always had a psychedelic edge to their sound, sort of a dizzying quality about them, and they've been very consistent so far. They've had Sorrow and Extinction, which I think is great. They've had their most recent before this, Heartless, which is also fantastic. And Tyler, what's that other album called? The one with the red background? I can never remember its fucking name.
Foundations of Burden.
Foundations of Burden, remarkably consistent band thus far, and this is their most recent effort. I will request that I at least just not go first here.
I'll go first because I've done a lot of prep, a surprising amount of prep for this. Because let me contextualize. So I was into Pallbearer back around when I think Foundations came out, and they were kind of getting a weird amount of buzz from like indie alts, music journalism, like Pitchfork and stuff were like really behind them, which was surprising because usually like that kind of music press ignore metal, and the metal world is kind of sectioned off and segregated from that kind of stuff, and you occasionally get rare bands like Pallbearer or Deaf Heaven that kind of bleed through into that kind of the mainstream of alternative, which I guess is what you could call that sort of Pitchfork stuff. But anyway, that's when I got onto them, and I was like super impressed by Sorrow and Extinction and Foundations of Burden. But what always struck me about I always felt that Pallbearer are a band that kind of got better and more defined and more ambitious with every album. And particularly I want to shout out Heartless, which is to date my favorite Pallbearer album. And I think
terrific record.
Stupidly underappreciated record that was just generally slept on in a way that really just doesn't make sense to me. Maybe people were getting sick of the fact of, like, I don't know, doom metal. Like, to me, like, leveling a charge like Pallbearer just make the same album 3 times, or like they're just like doom metal riff go burr for 3 albums in a row. I think you're really not paying attention to the records if you think that.
That's absurd.
because there's
so
much...
somebody who listens to a lot of doom metal, Pallbearer are some of the most adventurous, and they have so much definitive about their sound to imply that like any of their records are really all that similar to one another, I think is just ridiculous.
I mean, the one that most approaches perhaps convention is their first album, and even that's still different. It's just they're starting out. And I noticed that August and Saoirse both listened to Sorrow and Extinction this week, which I'm glad they did. But I would have definitely recommended either Foundations or Heartless, just because I think those two records show off more what the band is capable of. But regardless, they've always been like a really interesting band in the way that they kind of play with progressive and shifting and ambitious arrangements in their music. And that's always what the appeal of their stuff has been to me, and especially like Foundations. And Heartless is this crazy record where it's like you don't really have any repetition on it or any like conventional like verse chorus structure. It's just like they go from one idea to the next and constantly moving forward, and they somehow make it work in a way that really shouldn't. And that record's just so good. Anyway, so I was enjoying revisiting those three records to build up to Forgotten Days. And so I guess in some respects, Forgotten Days, I think, Jake, you're right in saying that it's kind of unfair and not really, doesn't really make much sense to say that any of their records resemble any of their other records, at least except for on like the superficial level. But if I were to make a comparison with this new record, I would say it's maybe closer to their first record in a certain sense, in a way that parts of it are more methodical and stripped back, but at the same time, there you still have kind of the ambitious shifting of some of the pieces on Foundations and Heartless as well. And you also have this more of an incorporation of an attempt to kind of, I don't want to say pop structure is not the right term, but like there are shorter pieces on here. I
completely agree with the point you're making. I've been struggling on saying it too, but there is I think like an active attempt to make their sound a bit more accessible here.
Yeah, because you have shorter pieces on this record that I'm thinking in particular of the song Stasis, which has this kind of like resonant guitar lead that's repetitive and the central musical motifs on it, and it's quite short, and it kind of could be, I don't think it was a single, but it could kind of be your sort of single choice on this record. And in a sense, I think we're Forgotten Days kind of... and I'll foreground this by saying that I think this is a very good album that I enjoy quite a bit. But I also think that it's probably, if I had to rank them, it'd probably be my least favorite Pallbearer yet, purely by virtue of ranking. And the reason for that is that it feels quite transitional, in a sense that they are kind of pushing towards that more refined sound, but they're also kind of incorporating longer pieces on here as well. And so what the result of that is a record that has plenty of individually good pieces of music, but it lacks the kind of coherence and flow that particularly Heartless has. But as I'll elaborate, that's really not a huge criticism. It's more of a nitpick. One noticeable change on this record is that, and sort of something that the band have been kind of refining with each record, is that the vocals are clearer than ever, particularly on a track like the opener and title track. And the vocals, which obviously clearly evoke classic era Aussie, as they have on every Pallbearer record, surprisingly been a point of contention for listeners, at least as far as I can tell from trawling online review sites, which is really strange to me, because I think that if I had to single out one element of this record as the triumph, I would probably single out the vocal performances on this record. I think that they're incredibly powerful.
Vocals and lyrics, I think, are like tremendously good.
Yeah, this is perhaps the first Pallbearer record where I'm particularly drawn into the vocals and lyricism above all else. Not that the guitar work is slacking in any department, it's certainly not. But this is really like where I think that what's his name? Brett, the front man, I forget his name.
Oh, it's Brett Campbell.
Brett Campbell, that's right. This is the first Pallbearer record where I'm really drawn into Brett Campbell, the songwriter, which I think is quite cool. Yeah, so the vocals never bugged me in Pallbearer's music in the past, and they don't really bug me here. The band have clearly embraced their clear Black Sabbath influence. You can't avoid that. They've talked about it openly. And I mean, every band that kind of works with an aesthetic in the doom metal sphere.
I was gonna say, like, Sabbath basically pioneered the doom metal movement.
Yeah,
you can't it's just
well, I mean, the thing is that Sabbath pioneered metal.
Yeah.
So
everything is gonna sound like their first record in some way or
but particularly this kind of subgenre, which has the clearest debt to it. But I think the value of a band in the modern day in that kind of subgenre is to the extent to which they push beyond those origins. And Pallbearer have always appealed to me because they're immensely talented songwriters and composers who do a lot to go beyond sort of static compositions.
Yeah.
You could not ever confuse a Pallbearer record for like drone metal or sludgy metal. It's very clearly progressive in style. That said, I do think that this aspect of their songwriting composition is not as consistently present on Forgotten Days as it has been in the past. I do think this is a bit of a stilted and inconsistent record, as I've said, that has high points, which are as brilliant as the best on their last two records. But yeah, it just weirdly doesn't quite cohere for me. And I'm ready to admit that could just be the fact that I have not spent as much time with it as I have spent with their other records, literal years with their other records. But this is just where I'm at the moment. I do think that the record starts off a bit weakly with opening track and then the second track, Riverbed. They both affect a more conventional structure, but they kind of trudge in circles rather than pushing forward. In particular, I think I have noticed some charges of poor production has been leveled at this record, and I think that for the most part, those charges are unfounded, except for in the first two tracks. I think that the record does start off sounding a bit lacking the clarity and verve of their previous records. I think the opening track in particular sounds muddy. There's even a bit of unintentional distortion, I think, at points, which I don't really think complements the sound, but it does lead to mixes that kind of curdle together towards the beginning. In particular, there's a guitar solo about 3 minutes into Riverbed that's barely audible. And it's like, this is not an issue on other parts of the record. It just is here for some reason. Yeah, I think Stasis, as I've said, it does benefit from a more singular focus across a brisk 4 minutes. It has a hooky melody driven by these really resonant guitar leads that I love. The Quicksand of Existing attempts a similar thing with guitarist Stephen Holt affecting a kind of like Reload era Kurt Hammett solo on this track, which for obvious reasons, I don't personally care for. It kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, I think, in an irritating way. I do think, though, that this song does transition really nicely into the next track, Vengeance and Ruination, which is immediately one of the darkest and most unforgiving pieces on the record. It's pure doom mayhem. It evokes fiery, satanic nightmare scenes and suffering, and the atmosphere is kind of thick with smoke and terror. Though I do think ultimately this piece outstays its welcome just a little. But criticisms stated. I've kind of danced around it up to this point, but I do think this album really makes its mark with one of the greatest pieces of music that Pallbearer have written to date, the fantastic behemoth 12-minute Silver Wings.
Yeah.
I fucking love this track so much.
I mean, this is the quintessential Pallbearer song in every way.
I would probably give that to, hang on, let me find what it's called, because I'm terrible at remembering track names. It's the closer on Heartless.
Plea for Understanding.
Yeah, I think
that's good pick. Good pick.
To me, that's the definitive Pallbearer track, but this is like second best. Yeah, and so consistently throughout their career, the band have excelled at these lengthy, multi-part progressive tracks, and this is really no exception. The guitars lumber and growl as they do on the best Pallbearer tracks, but frontman Brett Campbell's vocals soar.
Oh yeah.
There's just this moment about 5 minutes in where everything momentarily drops out, and then the guitars come in again, backing this kind of stunning lead solo that just left me basically dumbstruck. And this solo kind of extends across multiple minutes and then pulls us into the swirling progression of these dark, stumbling riffs that kind of trip over each other, and then eventually they're kind of linked together by Brett's voice finally coming in again and ringing out through the mix. This is about 7 minutes into the song, and it's about as clear and stunning as he's ever sounded, and then the rest of the track just absolutely goes from there. Yeah, amazing song. I love it. And it's by no means the sole highlight for me. I think Forgotten Days finishes really strong with 2 very solid pieces for the band. Rite of Passage is another track on the shorter side. It lacks the anthemic and melodic leads of the earlier attempts at concise and catchy metal, but instead it's driven by these soaring vocals and a rumbling but constantly shifting series of doom grooves. Continues that darker streak off the back of Vengeance and Ruination. Structurally, it calls back to some of the most striking moments of Heartless, while transposing that style to a more concise form with a verse-chorus-verse structure here, which that album largely eschewed. And then you have the closer, Caledonia, is more forlorn and sorrowful. Basically what this track is Devon Holt translating his grief over his mother's death into some of the most affecting and openly emotional playing he's ever laid to tape. Right from the outset, this track just gets you immediately. It was quite strange going from, because I this morning I listened to all 3 of the albums we're reviewing today in a row. I listened and I went straight from this song to Blackwater Park.
Oh,
I was like, yeah, this is the same vibe. This is the same energy as Blackwater Park. The exact same emotional energy as Blackwater Park the song has. The lyrics on Caledonia match the sense of overwhelming, thick despondency too. You have lines like, I can hardly muster a goodbye, and I'm pleading for this numbness to survive. Every day when clarity reveals, I've lost the will to let myself heal. It's just heartbreaking. I don't know, I mean, we've touched on and talked about music that discusses grief and grieving plenty of times in the past, but I don't know if in recent memory anyway, I've heard a song that's as openly just hurting as this is. It's really like, it should have come with a content warning. Should have come with a content warning. Holy moly. But look, the band don't forgo their love of surprises and their restless musical invention on this track either. It's not just like a grief-stricken trudge. There's still like a lot going on musically here. There's this fucking nuts breakdown about 5.5 minutes in that adds a new wrinkle. Like the grief has become so unbearable that the song's subject is just kind of shaking, falling apart, losing themselves completely. It's the fact that the instrumental can evoke that so vividly from me is really impressive. It's a hell of an ending to the album. And it's as good a reminder as any that Pallbearer have still got the chops to wring your emotions like a wet cloth and remove any doubt that they're one of the finest and most inventive metal bands of the last 10 years. So yes, while ultimately I do come off a little mixed on this album, really the lowlights are the shorter tracks here, I think by and large. And for me, Pallbearer really shine when they're leaning into their sort of stuff, the musical stuff that they've done best in the past. I definitely think there's a possibility for them to hone that kind of more refined and concise style a little bit more on a future release. And I have no doubt they will do that. But yeah, it's still a record that has plenty for fans to enjoy. I understand to a certain extent why this has gotten a little bit more of a muted reception, but at the same time, it's a real shame. I'm glad we're shouting it out today, even if not everyone here is a huge fan of it. I would understand that. But I'm glad we're shouting it out regardless, because I still think this is a really creative and interesting band who deserve the listenership and deserve, for people to take their time with their music. It's not really like the kind of music I think you can just let wash over you. It's music that you really can discover so much detail and musical inventiveness inside of. It's fucking Pallbearer. I love it.
I greatly appreciate the effort that you put into that, just because I know that this was going to this has gotten the slightly more muted reception that it has, and I've tried to explore and sort of read into reviews and figure out why that is, and not that I'm trying to invalidate anybody's opinion, but a lot of the reviews I've read on the internet that are just from users, not from publications, because not a lot of publications are covering this, is that the reviews just sound really insubstantive to me. I feel like that if this album is going to get the lukewarm reception that it's getting, it deserves more reviews like yours, Tyler, that are a little bit more in-depth as to what you actually feel on a moment-to-moment basis, rather than, this is, it's fine, I guess. And I'm just kind of
what's funny?
This is basically me adding the Sputnik music message boards that are boring as hell.
Speaking of reviews, what's funny is that Pitchfork, the review, I don't know what to call them, the website, I guess, that have always kind of that basically boosted Pallbearer to the attention of people outside the metal sphere. They gave this album an 8.0, which I think is a respectable rating. But weirdly, this is the part I don't understand. They gave Heartless a 6.0. And I'm like,
no.
How do you go from, I think they gave Foundations an 8.6 or something, best new music, whatever. And then I don't understand how you think they fell off with Heartless. It doesn't make sense to me.
That trajectory doesn't make sense to me at all.
I remember when Fantano put up his review of Heartless, and it's he put put I Saw the End as his least favorite, and complained about it being more commercial, Pallbearer becoming commercial or whatever. And I was like, you saw that this had a riff with a hook in it, and you decided that it was commercialized. And
fucking ridiculous.
You gave up.
Yeah, but that's just sort of the problem that I'm having, and I'm not trying to sometimes it can just be hard to figure out your feelings, but when you go on the internet and you every criticism I've read of this album just reads as being really slight and faint, and I just don't and I'm just give me more. Why is this the way this is? Because I won't front or anything. I said as much when I talked about it a few weeks ago, is that I really like this album. I maybe purposefully buried the lead slightly since then because so
look at my shocked face.
Yeah. So the thing is about this is that this album has not a story behind it, but as Tyler alluded to, there's a bit of personal history going into this, especially with that final track. But in interviews, the lead, Devin, what was his name? Was his name Dev? No.
Devin Holtz, the guitarist, the main guitarist.
Okay, just sort of, I've seen sort of the trajectory with the lyricism of Pallbearer, and it made a lot of sense when I read this, is that he has struggled opening up both as a person and in his music over the years, and as a result has taken a more direct approach to songwriting, sort of with every album sort of making a bit more of a stab at the things thematically that he wants to get at. And so it sort of starts off with these things on Sorrow and Extinction that are a bit more broad in terms of like the anxieties and fears that he's exploring on that record. It's that it kind of feels like cosmic in a sense, like the idea of death and chaos and these like really overwhelming fears, and they sort of get honed down. And I feel like that is sort of the approach here, and they said as much, that they wanted to make a more, in the band's words, a more direct record. And I get that. It's just sort of like, you know, with doom metal, it's a genre that's full of possibilities. There's lots of different subgenres within it. And I was just sort of like, okay, I want to dig into this a bit more. And what I found was just that Forgotten Days feels like a much more personal exploration of a state of grief, a state of depression, a state of just misery, being mired in misery. And that's not something that they're strangers to or that they haven't covered before, but with the more direct songwriting and the more pronounced vocals, I feel like it is an active attempt to explore a sort of specific area of the band. And the album starts off, Tyler did say that he found the production on the first two tracks to be a bit muddy, sort of a bit just, you know, it's not as like, I guess, fully formed as some of the other tracks can be, like with the mixing. And I understand this complaint because I had it when I first listened to it. And then I read that the person who produced the album is one of the producers, at least, that has worked with the band Sun, which are a drone metal band. And the more I listen to this, and I have spent a great deal of time with this record, like ever, like the day it dropped. So I've just sort of been having more of a relationship with it. I foresaw this episode as sort of being my version of Sufjan Stevens' The Ascension, where Tyler sort of goes to bat for developing a relationship with that as I have with this. And I sort of feel that they have the same sort of appeal, is that it just sort of, the way that it is mixed feels a bit more transportative. It makes you sort of mired in this sort of mood, this sort of ocean of like just pure sound. And it does sound muddier, and the instruments don't sound as clear. And it's something that I feel that the record is trying to intentionally evoke. I feel like even with the album art, with the title, it's sort of this swampy, this at times sludgy, not sludge metal, but sludgy sort of mix that just sort of you're mired through. You feel the gravity on. When I listen to this album, I feel like gravity, like I'm on a planet where gravity has twice its own effect. And it starts off with this strained, sort of wiry, noisy intro on the first track that sort of erupts into these, you know, the heavy, kind of what you expect, doom riffs. Stellar drumming on this record, I want to shout out. Absolutely, like, great from front to back, if you ask me. The first sort of song here, classic Black Sabbath. I think this is a really, really strong intro to the album. It just sort of starts with that and it just like immediately evokes shit like Master of Reality. And it sort of has more momentum but less weight than their other stuff. It moves a bit faster, but it does so a bit more concisely. And I understand maybe in doom metal, if that's not what you're looking for, then perhaps that might turn you off. For me, however, I think the prominent vocal mixing, it just sort of adds to this more direct approach that I really like, that I don't get in this genre very often. I find it refreshing, just the entirety of this album, really. You're just sort of meant to pay attention to the things that you don't typically pay attention to in doom metal. There's a bit more of a leaning into psychedelic sounds on this record, like on Sorrow and Extinction. Sort of Tyler implied that it's kind of closer to that album, and I agree with that. The way the vocals kind of spiral and they have this reverb throughout the track and other tracks. The opening, thematically, lyrically, is all about the distortion of time and feeling like the perception of time itself has been warped to the point where consciousness itself torments you. And you feel this disconnect from the people around you and the world around you. And there's an urgency to the vocal performances that sound desperate. And I think it's stellar. I think it's got a great central riff. I think it's not mixed in a way that I think, is necessarily friendly to all parties, but I think works for me. And I think the end is just absolutely immaculate. Just roars and explodes at the end. Like it's built to this thing, and then it just fucking enormous. And I love it. It's magnificent. Riverbed, huge, pummeling, sweeping song, perfectly matches its thematic content. The lyrics evoking this feeling of your body eroding at the bottom of a riverbed. Moments where the track sort of lulls are just so sad and quiet. And as he's begging for the pain to stop and wanting to heal and feeling worn away by time and sadness and loneliness, the grief is just so tangible here. The imagery of forests becoming deserts, distant silhouettes that you cling on to the hope of seeing disappearing. There's just no hope on this song. And the way it bounces between being delicate and being enormous feels like you are braving this storm. Stasis starts out with an incredible set of riffs and generally is about feeling stuck, as the title implies. Lyrically, this is where I feel the record really starts to hit its stride. Waste away, clone your moments every day, things will stay the same. It's a song that's very forwardly about depression, feeling defeated, and reveling in defeatism, unable to tear yourself away from feeling as awful as you do. I think it's one of the best moments on the record, too, just because of how poignant it is. I generally think that this lyrical approach just sort of rides the line between being poetic and memorable and occasionally very hooky really, really well. Do you need a reason to smile again? Your life is worth too much to waste. The whole thing wasted and wrapped up in yourself, which I find to be mildly encouraging, a sentiment that is just like, it's at the bottom of all of this despair, but it's still like looking at it with a sense of third person perspective that just really hits really hard. And it's just a sentiment that hits deep, especially with a year like the year that I think that we've all had. And there's amazing psychedelic synths here after the chorus, positively obliterating. I love them. Silver Wings, I can't possibly do it the justice that Tyler did, but it is the most lumbering, overpowering song on the record, the most progressive. The way it transitions into its different movements is beautiful. Featuring one of the more poetic set of lyrics, very elegiac. Silver wings circle, portents of a strange past returning. Over bones of crippled behemoths I tread through the mire. In the mists I can feel it looming as a vulture, eyes fall upon me. Just this set of like imagery of this like ancient and sort of dystopian crumbled world that you feel like has passed by. It's like a metaphor for your own life and looking at it and feeling like it's been wasted. There's the end. By mysteries of 10,000 ages, I cannot remember from where I came, and I cannot remember from who I once was. It's a titanic song. It's the exceptional drumming is also a highlight for me that makes it reminiscent of Sorrow and Extinction. The Quicksand of Existing is immediately very full of energy, picking up the pace right after Silver Wings. The guitars here are very gnarly sounding and very ugly, and the drums push the song along well. I do think, though, that it doesn't touch on any thematic material that is unique by this album standards. It's not repetitive, and the song itself I do think is very good, but I feel like it does not contribute as much to the album as the rest of the tracks on here do. I still really like the song. Vengeance and Ruination is a narrative-driven track that builds a positively hellish imagery of a prisoner being led to a gruesome public execution, which is described in morbid and painful detail as we listen to them cry for death and deliverance. It's here that the second verse is where I feel like the band touches on some material that is even darker that they've hinted about in interviews that it lets on, as the prisoner and the execution and torture in question become a bit more of a clear metaphor for self-harm, something I have spoken about at length on this show that I have struggled with, and I feel this track encompasses the helplessness of being in a state where you want others to help you, but your cries go unnoticed. specifically the lyrics, a ritual of violence, yet another link in a never-ending chain. The true measure of power is the ability to inflict cruelty. Are just another standout lyrical moment on this track. I remember just hearing this instantly the first time and just being absolutely taken aback. I really love this song, and by love, I mean this is difficult to listen to for me. Rite of Passage starts out very solemnly until the guitar tears through it. A superbly written track. The more all-encompassing and psychedelic sound here just positively captivates me. I love the raw power of this song. But the lyrics here are truly worth noting. The many flaws of my own admission, a void supreme I cannot pull away, this rite of passage. It took all of these years, but now I finally know. One question to ask you, did part of me die while watching you go? Gnawing doubts that I never ever learned to live. Just like the grief from the loss of his mother is a song that it just feels really tangible and is at points tear-inducing to me, and it's very rare that this has happened. I feel like the only maybe experience I've had with a doom metal record like this is the Bell Witch's record Mirror Reaper, which is similarly about very similar themes. I also just really like the melody of the chorus. I think it's very catchy. It's very memorable. It's a ruinous song about abandonment, grief, and heartbreak and trying to move on despite all of it. And it feeds into the sort of greater theme of the album about everything feeling cyclical and tragic and inescapable, and being in this inescapable sort of forgotten days state where it's just time does not feel like it goes on the way it should. Caledonia is just an incredible way to finish off the record. It is an immaculate and devastatingly sad song, maybe the saddest sounding song that they've produced thus far. From the opening lines, I wasn't prepared to face the final hues, to watch the color fade and let go of my youth. I could hardly muster a goodbye, pleading for numbness to arrive. It's heartache-inducing, and it has these huge, sludgy kind of riffs that make this song feel like I'm watching the world slowly end. And the synth-heavy psychedelic sound that's always tinted the band's best stuff, and this album is kicked into full gear, especially in the second half. I think the musicianship on this final moment is absolutely incredible, a shining moment for the band. And thematically, structurally, sonically, I think that while I understand that this is a very niche part of this band's sound and its appeal, and it's not what people like go to and maybe look for, I think it is a triumph. I think it is an aching, deeply personal dirge that affected me very deeply, and that I feel Pallbearer has built to as a band over the course of their career. And they have a sound that is perfectly suited to make an album like this. I find it enrapturing. It's beautiful. It's compelling. It's perfectly paced. And doom metal that achieves accessibility as well as perfect artistic clarity with its intentions. And the fact that just nobody else not on this podcast particularly, obviously, but just nobody else seems to be going crazy over it like I am just saddens me, just because I feel like it is an emotional labor of love for the band. And it's an album about loneliness and sorrow, so I guess in a weird poetic way it's kind of fitting, but it will remain important and unforgotten by me. This is one of my favorite albums so far this year, and I think it is incredible.
Bravo. Well said.
Well, thank you for that wonderful review. I know I dipped out for a bit of it from what I was here for. I loved hearing it.
Yeah, thank you for delving a little bit more into the lyricism, which I had time to do a little bit, but not as fully as it deserved. So it was nice to get that full breakdown.
Perfectly understandable.
Like I said, this is the real arrival of Brett. Fuck, I'm terrible. I
can't remember his
Brett
name.
Campbell.
Campbell.
Brett Campbell. The real arrival of Brett
Campbell.
Campbell as a serious songwriter in metal. Not that the lyricism on their previous albums isn't good, but just that you're not as it doesn't like hit the same way as it does here.
Yeah, Agreed.
Do y'all mind if I go next? Just because I don't have much to say, and I think it would be best to get out of the way. Sure. I mean, part of the reason I have less to say is probably because out of everyone on this podcast, I'm probably the least qualified to talk about doom metal, and probably out of all the genres, is probably the one I am least qualified to talk about. So I will try to make my Philistine opinions make sense. In this week, I did listen to Sorrow and Extinction, which I like very much. But the main draw for me to that album was the way in which the texture of the music felt incredibly sorrowful, and the way that album it felt mournful in just how the music made your brain give you hormones. And here the music is very different. For a start, the lyrics are probably the biggest draw for me to this album, and the clean vocals are done so well and mixed so beautifully in general. I love the new approach to guitar tones. I love the new influences they're drawing from more explicitly. I think it gives the album, as I think Tyler said, a more accessible edge. Not that that's needed, but probably needed for me, the young one to do metal that I am. Again, the lyrics and the way it very openly talks about grief and depression and loneliness are very resonant. Again, I think just whenever I listen to a doom metal record, as much as I love it, I feel slightly at arm's length just because of the tenets of the genre just do that to me a bit.
That is perfectly understandable, by the way. I just this is not an accessible genre, and I find myself having problems with albums in it like that. So I don't want you to feel like you're, coming at it from a place that doesn't make sense. Like, that's a totally valid take.
When we reviewed the Boris album,
yeah,
and I really loved the punk stuff, but
but the doom stuff just wasn't for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would say, honestly, I think that Pallbearer are a pretty great choice for a band to sort of ease yourself into that style, just because they're so heavily melodic.
Especially this album compared to Sorrow and Extinction, certainly, as well.
Yeah.
I get much more melodic satisfaction from. Most of the things I have to say about this album has already been said by Jake and Tyler, and with much more eloquence and knowledge of the genre. But I do want to highlight the fact that The Closer is one of the best songs of the year, Fight Me. I will now give over to people who know more about this to talk about this.
Well, August is eating, so...
He do be eating.
This is fuck. I was not looking forward to talking about this. Mostly because I have been struggling with this record since I heard it. I've listened to it like 3 or 4 times now, and I have slowly sort of acclimated to it, particularly in its second half. I completely mirror the sentiments that Silver Wings and Rite of Passage are excellent bits from the band, some of their best work yet, and especially Caledonia, which, I mean, she's just fucking hell, the solos on that, I mean, Jesus Christ. That. But the first half is so strange to me. It's just some strange decision making. Let's crack open the mixing.
The mixing expert has logged on.
Well, that's I definitely wouldn't say I'm a mixing expert, but I know what guitar tone should sound like, and it's not that. Particularly with doom metal, because my current guitar rig is sort of this isn't really what I use it for. I use it for all sorts of stuff, but it's like a rig that doom metal is catered towards, and a problem that it can encounter is that if you don't dial it in right and you just don't have an overdrive pedal, it can get really flubby in the low end. And I don't exactly know how to make that make sense. It just sounds flubby. It just needs tightening up. But you put an overdrive pedal on it, and the low end is tightened up, and it's a much clearer signal, while maintaining all of the fuzz and the sort of vicious, gnarly throatiness of it. And this just sounds like they forgot to do that, particularly on the first two tracks. You find a way to get on board with this mixing, then God bless you. I can't do it.
Morgan, I have to say that hearing this from someone who I know and trust and know is not just like a pretentious metal geek, that is how I feel about this, is immensely gratifying, because I was starting to wonder if I was just a pleb for thinking the first two tracks, and just the first two, sounded measurably worse.
Yeah, I have to assume that it was a conscious decision, in which case it is one that I fully do not understand. I especially considering how tight most of the rest of the album sounds and how tight the last three records sounded. If that enhances the atmosphere, then, as I said, God bless. But I will not. I'm not. I can't do it. But the problems with the album go further than that for me, particularly in the first half, because I feel like, as we've all stated, Pallbearer are really, really good at sort of flowing progressive pieces of music that are, anywhere from 7 to 13 minutes long in length typically, and that's kind of what they're really good at. I feel like the idea of making this more direct and sort of making more concise and approachable songs is a good one. I am on board with that idea to sort of, I don't want to use the term accessible. I just think the word, I feel like sometimes in music criticism, people say accessible, and really what they mean is more direct, which those mean two different things. And I don't think the aim here was to become more accessible. It was to more tangibly convey the emotions that were felt here, which is something I find fully admirable. But I have to say, just does not work for me here, really. It feels like, I don't know, it just feels like this is it. As Tyler said, it's sort of in a transition phase, and it just feels like it needs a touch more work. I feel like the next Pallbearer album might well be their best. They're kind of on an upward trajectory anyway, so that would make sense. But I feel like there's so many ideas there's going to come to a head on the next one, based on both Heartless and this. That I'm really excited for that, but this does feel like a sort of awkward transition. It's like this would be right for about how long the band's been around, but it sounds like they're going through puberty.
Well, I think what it is like, for me anyway, it's like, how do you follow up your masterpiece? Because that's what Heartless is to me. And so it's definitely trying to push in some new directions, but it's still a little bit, I think, of a little bit of uncertainty as to what Pallbearer's identity is going to be going forward. Because like Heartless was to me was like the pinnacle of a steady trajectory, And so it's always an awkward position as to where you go after that.
Yeah, it's just this is why this is so difficult to talk about, because I'm not even like fully, reconciled my complaints or my positives with myself, because I can't. This album feels so hard to pin down, or just really just my feelings on it are hard to pin down, because it's like I want to like it at every turn, and it fights me at every turn, almost. Whether it be through production choices or structure. But in terms of positives, I think it picks up significantly in the second half. Any and all production issues are eliminated. And while I did sort of say that Pallbearer's at their best when they're doing really like long movements, some stuff in the second half, particularly Vengeance and what's the second word?
Ruination.
Vengeance and Ruination does kind of outstay its welcome. It's like mostly great, so I can't be too mad.
I had the same sentiment about that track, and then Jake explained how he feels about it and how he interprets it, and now I just want to go and listen to it again. So that's the best takeaway from any review.
Once again, God bless. Not for me. Well, most of it's for me, but that.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, words are difficult when you have complex emotions about a piece of art. Yeah, it picks up really strongly in the second half. The playing and performances on all parts of the personnel and in pretty much every part of the album itself, regardless of my issues, is uniformly fantastic. These are just clearly seasoned players operating at the height of their powers. And I would expect nothing less from the people who made Heartless. So I'm glad to see that that's intact. But like, I also just do not vibe with half of this, and that sucks. It really does. And
I think that this is really more of like you saying it's a transitionary record is so on point, because it's really like, just imagine a lot of like branches going in different directions that connect an album to the next album in a discography. And when you're transitioning, these branches are fluid. They're like water. And they're going to connect with different things. It's not as substantive when you're trying to when you're not in a trajectory. And it's really just a matter of whether or not the fluidity of this transition works for you or not. And I think that it's basically specifically with me, Tyler, and Morgan, it's sort of shown the spectrum of how these transitionary elements can affect someone. They can work for you, like me. You can be kind of mixed on it, like Tyler, and they can mostly uniformly just not work, like Morgan.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. I think the more focused this is, the better it is, and the flubbier it is, the less it is.
Definitely, I can definitely say that we're, at least most of us, are definitely gonna be excited for whatever they fucking do next, because it's
yeah. Well, I mean, you have 3 albums that are great, and you make one that's kind of so-so. I'm still excited for your next thing. That's about all.
That leaves August.
Yeah, so I obviously listened to Sorrow and Extinction, I think it's called, in prep for this.
Yep.
And I feel I've listened to the 2 Pallbearer albums that are the least for me.
Probably.
They're the two who would be at the bottom for me as well.
Yeah, which I feel is incredibly apparent in that really what's so immediately apparent about this band has been made a really great point of so far. They are very indebted to Black Sabbath and Ozzy's work as a whole. It's an influence that they wear right on their sleeve. They don't and I can respect them enough for that they're not like trying to hide this is what they're coming from. This is just Pallbearer, and they really embrace this kind of 60s psychedelia, early metal and rock with kind of this doomy flavor on it. And certainly what's really nice here is just the heaviness and kind of the blistering nature of most of the instrumentals here, and obviously that very noticeable shift to more personal, direct lyrics. I mean, on their first album, for all I care, the lyrics could be like fucking, for 1,000 years I've wandered these halls waiting for the wizard to unslap my balls. That's what they could be on the first album, and I wouldn't really care. But here, they've got much more immediately emotional song topics, like the title track being very clearly about Alzheimer's, I thought. And
yeah.
And I think it's that theme is then carried over to the second song as well, which also very weird, as Morgan and Tyler have like nailed my like, this sounds strange issue on the head, although put it into words that are much better than what I could have done. But otherwise, I think the production is quite solid. And I think while they're not necessarily bad, well, none of this is necessarily bad. I think it's all quite good. They are all quite skilled players, performers, and Brett Campbell is even a not half bad songwriter. I just feel that maybe a bit of this is as a result of them wearing their influences so clearly, but I felt like on both this album and on their first album that after a certain point, I feel their kind of bag of tricks, bag of ideas can run very thin, and I can feel like we are just going over ground we have already covered. We are repeating it. And what always strikes me as unfortunate is what has struck me as unfortunate about these two albums in particular is I think the better half of these albums are both their back halves, but there's also tends to be the time when I'm really kind of feeling the runtime and feeling that repetition, so I'm not able to get into them as much as I feel I really should be able to. And it's something I do like it. I like the doominess, the heaviness, the kind of dreariness, the haze, the feedback. A lot of what I liked on a lot of the more doomier stuff on Boris's No, which we discussed earlier, that was good there, is also good here, except of course this is like 50 some odd minutes of that kind of stuff. I just wish it was all done in a little tighter of a package. I wish it was presented a little air quotes cleaner, because telling this record to clean up is kind of it doesn't really work. But yeah, that's about what I thought.
Oh, no, definitely fair. Yeah, great segment, I think, because we all took. It's difficult passing sometimes feelings about a record like this when you're not like 100% on board with it, but you're also like, you are enjoying it. So I think everyone did a really good job.
Yeah, no, I
Agreed.
would really like to hear their kind of two intermittent records because I get the
Yeah,
feeling
Heartless is the album for you, August.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Those two, I get the gut feeling I'd enjoy. But
both of them. I couldn't pick one over the other for you, but they're both great. Okay, so let's do our favorite tracks and ratings. We'll do reverse order this time, shall we? So my 3 favorite tracks are Silver Wings, obviously, Caledonia, and Rite of Passage. My least favorite track is probably Riverbed, and I'm going to give this album 7.5 out of 10.
Neat. If we're going reverse, then that's me. I'm going to say I enjoyed Caledonia. I enjoyed The Quicksand of Existing. I know we have quibbles on the, Silver Wings, sort of, and I'm going to give this album a 7.
Oh, that's me. My 3 favorites are it's difficult because the only ones I have like super strong feelings are Caledonia and Silver Wings. So those 2 obviously. But I do like Rite of Passage, so I'll throw that on there to make it 3. My least favorite is probably Riverbed. Probably also gonna go 5.5 out of 10 on this one.
Well, that's August then.
Well, my 3 favorite tracks here would probably be the last 3, Caledonia, Rite of Passage, and Vengeance and Ruination. My least favorite, I'd have to go Riverbed for much of the reasons stated, and I would give this album a 6 out of 10.
Okay.
Right. My 3 favorite tracks are Silver Wings, Vengeance and Ruination, and Caledonia. Least favorite, Quicksand of Existing by a very narrow margin, and I'm giving the album a 9.5 out of 10.
Great.
That's pretty good.
That is a 7.1, which is the same rating we gave Anime, Trauma, and Divorce.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And also Peaceful as Hell by Black Dresses.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
Similarly contentious.
So next week's new release reviews are going to be belatedly covering Ortega's second studio release of 2020 plus, which obviously is going to be a thing we do.
Look, I'm saying it's not belated. Everybody needed to take as much time as we did with it.
That's fair.
No, definitely, and I'm glad we did. And we'll also be discussing an artist I'm actually very excited to get into over the next 7 days to prep for this. Aesop Rock's new album.
Jake Core.
Spirit World Field Guide, I think is what it's called. Yeah. Something like that. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be a fun discussion.
Listen to the Impossible Kid.
I've got the Impossible Kid as well as a couple of other ones of his downloaded that I'm going to listen to. So I'm looking forward to that. Yes, and so now is the point at which, if you're still with us, you should hop over to our Opeth review and watch us discuss Blackwater Park / gush over Blackwater Park. But also let us know in the comments what you think of either of the albums we've discussed today, the KYLIE record or the Pallbearer record. We're very curious and want to know what you think, especially if you disagree with any of us on anything. So let us know down in the comments, and we'll see you on the next one.
Rock over London.
Rock on Chicago. Wheaties. Breakfast of Champions.